Hello, welcome to the Eugenics podcast. I'm Patrick Merricks.
I'm Marius Turda.
Morning, Marius. How are you?
Good morning, Patrick. I'm very well, thank you.
Wonderful stuff. So this episode, we're talking about images and visions. Specifically, we're looking at how photography and imagery has been used in the eugenics movement sort of internationally. So begin by talking about Darwin, Marius. So what would you like to say about Darwin?
You know, as they say, an image is worth 1,000 words. And scientists were very astute and keen to capitalize on the development of photography at the end of the 19th century. What we have here, Charles Darwin's very important book, The Expression of Emotions in Man and Animals, published in 1872. And he was one of the first to use photography to illustrate how he could capture human emotions and animal emotions. So it's one of the first scientific works we have that made use of the emerging art of photography. And that's extremely important because it illustrates very clearly that, you know, seeing is believing, and people would be more convinced of the scientific argument if presented with something they could identify with, read very quickly, and understand better. So it's why we start with his work.
So one aspect of this history is its focus on criminality. So how would photographs be used with to identify criminals?
The Italian scientist Cesare Lombroso, who's considered to be the father of criminal anthropology and criminology, he was one of the scientists who made a great use of photography to explain his arguments, to put forward his theory that degeneration can be seen, is expressed physically on the face of the individual. And he adorned his work with numerous images and photos. And he was very successful in continuing on this tradition. Physiognomy explains diversity and difference, explains the abnormality and shows the normality of certain individuals. So there's one direction that went and became very important in anthropology. The other one was picked up by Francis Galton, who too was interested in criminals and other social groups. But his work was in a way trying to create the average type. So he would combine various photos and images of individuals to create a composite image, composite photography. And we have one example here. So from early on, by 1870s, with the work of Charles Darwin, and then through the work of people like Lombroso and Galton, photography infuses strongly with arguments, and is being used and abused by scientists in order to put forward certain arguments. And it's a much powerful medium than the written word. It's a much powerful way of convincing people of allegedly objective reality by showing it to them. Although, of course, many of these images and photos were completely fabricated and composed, as we have the case of Francis Galton.
So now we move to the theme of race. So Eugen Fischer, what was his aim here?
Lombroso started using photography to, in a way, explain certain racial typologies, you know, the race of criminals, of prostitutes, and so on and so forth. So equating, in a way, the category of race with the category of the social, so the biological and the social. But other racial anthropologists were very keen to use photography to put forward their theories of how race is being transmitted from generation to generation. How can we find racial traits? How can we identify racial groups and separate them? And here's a very clear example of a very important racial anthropologist, Fischer, who went to German Southwest Africa in 1908, today's Namibia, and he worked on the Rehoboth bastards, as they were called, and he looked basically at racial crossing, tried to explain what happens if a person of the black and white race, respectively, produce offspring. And it basically was trying to demonstrate that racial traits are transmitted in Mendelian fashion. The way he put it, race is heredity.
Speaking of heredity, now we move to Norway. So this is an interesting example of this is someone's upbringing here.
Yeah, it's very interesting to see how the entire argument about Mendelism, heredity, race, and with that, the entire genealogy of scientific traditions that were used to substantiate these claims were being taught and then were being disseminated to the general public. And I think this is a very evocative image. We have the famous and infamous eugenicist and racial anthropologist Jon Mjøen from Norway, who is actually doing that to his own children. He's educating them in the laws of heredity, in racial hygiene, and explaining how pedigree works. So I find this image extremely powerful in terms of how much they took that. And of course, it served to illustrate that actually it is not mere propaganda for the general public. It's something that eugenicists are keen to apply to their own families and are keen to explain and educate their own children.
So now we move to negative eugenics. This is quite a famous, certainly a famous case and a famous picture here. So, but for those who don't know about this, what's this story?
Well, this is the story, the oft-quoted story of Carrie Buck, who was sterilized under the 1924 racial integrity law in Virginia, and prompting, of course, Justice Holmes to say 3 generations of imbeciles are enough. You have here a picture with a mum, Emma. So Carrie was sterilized, so there will not be another offspring, allegedly believing that she was feeble-minded. And it's interesting to see that how in the visual culture of eugenics, photography was used to not only show what is to be desired and admired, but also what needs to be corrected, what needs to be fixed up. So they spend a lot of time showing pedigrees of defective families, as they were called, of criminals, of social misfits, people with disabilities, in order to put their message across, in order to infuse the public with the danger of degeneration, racial peril. So we have a very interesting interplay here that on the one hand, scientists explain allegedly very objectively what race is all about, what heredity is all about, and then how that is being transmitted and applied practically to social realities. And this is the image that I think many of us know and symbolizes, epitomizes the effect of sterilization programs in America.
But also in America, there was, and elsewhere, there was positive eugenics, positive in quotations there. Not really sure if it's a good thing, but what's happening in this image, the babies don't look too happy.
No, this is a baby contest, as they were called at the time. So you have this simultaneous work of eugenicists to promote images of racial fitness, of white families as the epitome of superior cultures in civilization and racial heredity. So on the one hand, they would be very keen to showcase images of defectives, but that was always compensated by a great deal of effort they put into showcasing successful families with healthy children, white families, of course. So I always find it very fascinating how images were used in a dialogue all the time. On the one hand, you have what can be called negative aspects of heredity, with emphasis on women, feeble-minded, minorities, defectives, and so on and so forth. At the same time, the camera moves and captures the success of those who are actually abiding by the laws of heredity. They have healthy offspring. And in a way, the discussion is here, of course, the future of the race rests with these families, with these wonderful white babies. So it's been extremely powerful and very widely used across the United States and across the world, this dialogue between negative and positive visual cultures of eugenics.
Moving into the present day, I mean, is this the image that we connect with sort of modern eugenics?
That's another way of seeing how when the conversation occurs about whether or not eugenics is back, in what form is back, the images they use are very powerful. Again, so this is from 2016. The Spectator, very well-known and influential British magazine, published this image, and it in a way reconfigures the entire discussion about genetic fitness and how eugenics is a way of going back to discussions that we highlighted here about what is desired, what is undesired, how the babies represent the future, and how, in a way, we can easily explain this to the general public with a very powerful image. And you have this on the cover of the Spectator. And that's something that requires a certain hermeneutics on behalf of the scholars to dig deeper into the visual cultures, to dig deeper into the way eugenicists are popularizing their messages, past and present, through the use of images, photos, and through the use of photography. So images create visions. So you have images that create eugenic visions about the family, about the nation, about the race, about society, about the future.
Well, thanks, Marius, for providing us with this window into the visual history of eugenics. It's very, very interesting, and thanks to everyone for viewing. And once again, Marius, thanks, and see you next time.
Thank you, Patrick. Till next time.